The diner smelled like maple syrup, old wood, and grease. The kind of smell that never leaves your clothes or your memory. Rain tapped lightly against the windows, each drop streaking down in thin, glistening trails. Outside, the street was empty. Inside, the slow rhythm of forks against plates and mugs against formica set the morning's mood. It was 8:13 a.m. on the dot when Harold Hal Brenner pushed open the door. He entered without fanfare, as he always did, the small silver bell above the frame giving a tired jingle. He moved with deliberate care, not the stutter step of weakness, but the steady, stubborn pace of a man who'd learned to walk through pain as if it were part of the terrain. Hal wore a clean, pressed flannel tucked into tan slacks, the crease still sharp. His shoes were polished, brown leather, worn but gleaming at the toe. On his chest, pinned just above the pocket, a silver star caught the light with quiet pride. He carried no umbrella, just a folded newspaper under one arm and a cane in the other, walnut, hand-carved, the initials HB etched faintly near the handle. He took his usual spot, the far corner booth by the window. From here, he could see the rain, the street, the world. It wasn't the best seat, but it was his. Dina spotted him the moment he came in. She was behind the counter, drying a chipped coffee mug with a towel that had long since given up the ghost. 32, tired without admitting it, and bitter in ways she didn't always notice. Her ponytail was lopsided, her makeup from yesterday barely faded, and her patience was hanging by a thread thinner than her waitress pad. She sighed. "Fantastic," she muttered under her breath. Mr. Limpin lingers back for his weekly pilgrimage. Mateo, the busboy, barely 18 and too polite to laugh, winced. Dina didn't wait for him to sit before grabbing a menu and walking over, not in greeting, but with the air of someone delivering a summons. "Morning," she said, voice flat. Same old, same old?" Hal looked up, his eyes steady but kind. "If it's not too much trouble." Dina slapped the menu down on the table, not hard, but hard enough to make a point. She scribbled on her notepad like she was drawing battle plans. 2 eggs, over easy, 1 pancake, black coffee, no sugar." She looked up, one brow arched. "You going to actually eat the toast this time, or just rearrange it like a crossword puzzle?" Hal chuckled softly, folding his hands. "Well, that depends on how crunchy it is. I've chewed through harder things, but I'm not looking to re-enlist." Dina didn't smile. She turned and walked off, her sneakers squeaking against the floor. Mateo followed her back toward the counter, stealing a glance over his shoulder at the old man in the corner. Dina rolled her eyes as she slapped the order ticket onto the carousel. "Guy acts like he fought in Gettysburg." Mateo said nothing, just went back to refilling napkin dispensers. Hal sat in silence, not uncomfortable, just still. Outside, a crow landed on the sidewalk, shook the rain from its wings, then flew off again. Inside, the diner kept moving, but now every clink and clatter seemed to echo a little louder. The booth felt more like a stage, and the audience was just beginning to watch. In the kitchen, the fry cook whistled something old and tuneless as the scent of sizzling eggs drifted into the dining area. Dina leaned on the counter, arms crossed, watching the cook with glassy impatience. "I swear," she muttered, half to herself, half to Mateo. "He just likes hearing himself order. That voice, like he's narrating a war documentary. Next week, I expect him to bring a flag and a bugle." Mateo didn't respond. He was crouched beside the coffee station, restocking creamers, but the muscles in his shoulders tensed ever so slightly. Dina noticed, narrowed her eyes. "You're not about to get sentimental on me, are you?" He shrugged. "He's polite. Just seems like he's been through a lot." Dina snorted. "Yeah, so has my rent bill. Doesn't mean I tell it thank you every week." She walked away before he could answer. Back at the booth, Hal unfolded a letter from his inside pocket, creased, yellowing at the edges. He placed it gently on the table beside the salt shaker and his folded glasses. His eyes skimmed the words slowly, reverently. At the bottom, a Department of Veterans Affairs seal, and beneath it, the name of a ceremony he had never attended. His name was typed in bold. Harold James Brenner, for gallantry and self-sacrifice during the Huachon Reservoir engagement. He had read the words before, many times. Still, they never felt real. The coffee arrived with a clink that nearly splashed the contents over the rim. Dina dropped the mug unceremoniously, not caring if it landed in his reach. "Careful," Hal said, not unkindly. "The last time someone rushed me, it was with a bayonet." Dina didn't laugh. She turned on her heel and disappeared into the kitchen. 2 booths away, a couple had paused their conversation. Jim and Barbara, locals, familiar faces in town, retired schoolteacher and church treasurer. They both watched Hal quietly, a flicker of recognition passing between them. "He carried my brother once," Jim whispered to Barbara. "Back in Korea, I told you that." Barbara nodded slowly. Her eyes moved to Dina's retreating back. The eggs came out next, overdone, edges brown and curling. Dina set the plate down with a flat thump, then stood there, tapping her notepad. "You want ketchup, or are we playing soldier again and eating it plain?" Hal looked up at her, not angry, not even disappointed, just tired. "No ketchup," he said gently. "And no games, just breakfast." Dina rolled her eyes. "Suit yourself." She turned to go. Behind her, Jim rose from his booth. Not to interfere, not yet. But something in him stirred, an old sense of loyalty, or perhaps simply decency long dormant. Hal took a bite of the pancake, chewed thoughtfully. He did not grimace, though it was dry. He did not complain, just sipped his coffee, unfolding the newspaper as if nothing had happened at all. But inside, something was moving, slow, quiet, like a fault line preparing to shift. It was colder than death that night, a cold so sharp it sliced through coats and flesh and thought. The sky was black velvet, smothered by snow clouds, and the only light came from mortar flares blooming silently in the distance like broken stars. The Huachon Reservoir had become a graveyard. Hal was 20 years old, his uniform soaked through, knees torn from crawling over ice-blanketed shale. The tank he'd been assigned to, a steel monster called Hound 3, now lay split and smoking, the tread torn off like paper, fire hissing from its side like a dying animal. 3 of his crew were dead. 1 wasn't. Private Wesley Monroe was wedged under the chassis, his legs pinned, blood pumping from his abdomen in slow, sickening bursts. His mouth moved, but no sound came, just eyes wide with terror, begging. "Hold on, Wes," Hal whispered, breath steaming as he crouched, shoulder pressing into the burning metal. Behind them, shouts rang out. Enemy soldiers, Chinese, moving along the ridge. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness like searchlights hunting ghosts. They were 30 yards from cover, 30 miles from safety. Hal's leg was already broken, snapped sideways when the explosion threw him back. But he didn't stop moving. "I got you, boy. I got you." He wedged a crowbar from the wreckage, pried at the bent metal. His fingers bled from the edges. When the bar snapped, he used a broken shovel. When that gave, he used his bare hands. It took 11 minutes. 11 minutes of gritted teeth, of grunts swallowed to avoid drawing fire, of pain blinding him every time he tried to lift Wesley onto his shoulders. He limped the first 10 feet, then crawled, dragged Wesley across the snow, inch by inch, leaving twin trails, one red, one dark. A bullet grazed his boot heel, another cracked the rock inches from his head. Still, he didn't stop. He didn't remember how they reached the bluff, only that a squad of his own men found them hours later, curled beside each other in a makeshift snowbank, both near frozen. Hal's eyes were open. His pulse was faint. Wesley's arm was still around his neck, like he hadn't dared let go even after unconsciousness took him. Back in the diner, Hal took a slow sip of coffee. The pain in his hip flickered again. Sharp, familiar, but not cruel. He welcomed it now. It reminded him of that night, of the life he'd carried, of the silence he'd shared with a dying boy who didn't die. He unfolded the letter again, his thumb resting on the faded line. Private Brenner is hereby awarded the Bronze Star for extraordinary bravery under fire. It still didn't feel like it was about him. The voices around him had softened. Dina hadn't returned yet. Jim and Barbara still watched in silence. Mateo stood by the pie case, towel in hand, unmoving. The diner was beginning to feel like something else. Not just a room for food, but a room where something unspoken was waiting to happen. And it was almost time. Dina emerged from the kitchen holding a plate with 2 overcooked sausage links and a slice of toast that looked like it had been forgotten under a heat lamp. She didn't glance at Hal as she dropped it onto the table, her voice as dry as the bread. "Let me know if it's edible this time." Hal looked up at her, eyes calm but deeply still. "I've eaten worse," he said. "Once spent a week chewing leather straps off a busted pack. Made better jerky than that toast." Dina gave a short, sarcastic laugh, but the silence around her stole the sound away. Jim's fork stopped mid-air. Barbara folded her napkin, slowly and deliberately. Mateo had stopped wiping the counter. The cook leaned through the service window, listening now, brow furrowed. Dina turned, oblivious or pretending to be, and muttered as she passed Mateo. "Guy's got jokes for days. Probably thinks he earned his breakfast just by showing up in uniform 50 years ago." It wasn't loud, but it was just loud enough. Hal's hands paused. One rested lightly on the bronze star beside his wallet. The other smoothed the edge of the VA letter, as if to ground himself. Jim stood. The sound of his chair legs scraping across tile was thunderous in the quiet diner. Dina turned, confused. "Everything okay, sir?" Jim's voice was low, steady, but carved from something solid. "You know who you're talking about?" Dina blinked. "He's just a regular. Comes in, orders the same thing, barely tips." Jim took a step forward. "He's the reason my brother came home from Korea. The only reason. Carried him 3 miles through snow with a shattered leg and a bullet in his shoulder." Dina scoffed, but the sound fell flat. "He doesn't talk about it," Jim added. "Because men like him don't need to." Hal said nothing. He folded the letter slowly and placed it back in his coat pocket. Dina rolled her eyes and turned toward the register, but the room didn't let her go. Barbara rose next, quietly. She walked to Hal's booth and set a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Hal, I think they need to hear it." Hal looked up. "What's that, Barb? What happened? Why you can't run to the bathroom like the rest of us? Why you walk like your bones remember something we've all forgotten?" He chuckled lightly, shaking his head. "I didn't come here for speeches." Barbara smiled softly. "You came here for pancakes, and we came here for decency. Let's have both." Dina stood frozen now, words catching in her throat. Mateo looked between them, then took off his apron, quietly walked to Hal's booth and stood beside him. The toast remained untouched, but the truth had just been served. Hal rose slowly, one hand pressing into the table, the other gripping the cane with practiced certainty. The old wound in his leg flared again, but he didn't wince. Pain was an old friend, not an obstacle. The room was so quiet, you could hear the tick of the wall clock above the pies. He didn't speak right away, just stood there, adjusting the crease of his coat like he was back in formation, preparing to address someone who still mattered. Then he looked at Dina, not harshly, not with anger, just with that same steady calm that had carried men through mortar fire and frostbite. "You know," he said, voice measured, "I didn't come here for free food. I didn't come here for applause." He reached into his coat and unfolded the letter, the one with the VA seal, and placed it gently on the counter next to his untouched toast. "I come here because I like the quiet, because the coffee's strong, and because I can sit by the window and watch the world I helped keep from falling apart." Dina's lips parted slightly, but no words came. Hal continued. "That medal," he said, nodding toward the bronze star he now placed beside the letter, "wasn't given for showing up late or filling out the right forms. It was for dragging a man out from under a burning tank, across 300 yards of ice, with my leg shattered and bullets tearing the sky apart." Someone in the back gasped. Quiet. Real. I didn't do it for the medal. I did it because he was mine. A friend. Barely older than my grandson now. I was 20 and scared. But I made a promise, to him and to myself, that I wouldn't let him die cold and alone. His voice didn't waver. It deepened, not with pride, but with gravity. He made it. I stayed behind for surgeries, missed the boat home, lost my leg mostly, but I've never regretted it. He looked around now, not at Dina, but at every table. I don't talk about it, because dignity doesn't raise its voice. But I'll say this, no one, no matter how young, tired, or bitter, should ever look at someone who limps and assume he's less than whole. Jim stepped forward and clapped once, a single beat, solid. Then Barbara, then Matteo, and then the sound rolled through the room, not as noise, but as thunderous recognition. One by one, every person in the diner stood, not clapping wildly, just rising, straight-backed, hats removed, eyes filled. Dina's lip trembled. Her eyes shone with something she hadn't felt in years, something sharp, something honest. Shame. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Only a breath, and then a whisper. I didn't know. Hal nodded slowly. Now you do. He turned to Matteo and pressed a folded $10 bill into his hand. For you. Always listen first. He left the medal on the counter, not as a display, as a reminder. Then, leaning on his cane, he walked out, coat buttoned, spine straight, head high. The bell above the door gave a final chime, and the whole diner remained standing long after he was gone. The diner didn't move for a long time after the bell above the door gave its last chime. Chairs remained empty but upright. Coffee cooled in mugs. A child across the room stood silently beside his mother, unsure why he wasn't supposed to speak, but certain he shouldn't. The only sound came from the kitchen, the fryer still bubbling, unaware it had missed something sacred. Dina stood behind the counter like she was bracing against wind. Her fingers clenched the edge of the register. Her jaw twitched. She stared at the medal, the bronze star, and the folded letter beside it. It felt radioactive. She looked up, scanning the faces still watching her. No one sneered, no one gloating, just disappointment, and something worse, clarity. She reached forward with trembling hands and picked up the medal. The medal felt warmer than she expected, heavier, as if it didn't just carry honor, but memory. Her reflection looked back at her from the surface, pale, hollow-eyed. For a split second, she looked 13 again, not 32, back when her father's silence meant something awful had followed him home. She'd never asked what, and he never said. Maybe Hal had been someone's father like that. Maybe all this time she'd been serving ghosts with coffee. I messed up, she whispered. Matteo nodded gently. Yeah. He didn't say it unkindly, just honestly. She swallowed, blinking hard. Barbara approached the counter. Her voice, when it came, was kind but firm, like a teacher speaking to a student who still had time to change her grade. You have a chance to make it right. Most people never do. Dina looked down at the medal, then slowly folded the VA letter back along its worn creases. She placed both inside a clean, unused takeout bag and held it to her chest like it was glass. Outside, the rain had slowed. Hal walked along the sidewalk with no hurry, cane clicking softly against the damp pavement. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He had said what needed saying. Back inside, the diner began to move again, slowly, like a heartbeat restarting. People sat. Coffee was poured. But the hush remained, as though the room had been changed on a level deeper than sound. Dina tucked the bag under the register, wiped her eyes, and took a long, steadying breath. Then she turned to Matteo. Can you cover the counter for a sec? Sure, he said. She stepped out from behind the counter and disappeared into the back room. Not to hide, but to think. And maybe, finally, to listen. The next Thursday morning, the bell above the diner door rang again. But it wasn't Hal who entered first. It was Dina. She moved with intention, Her hair neatly tied, a fresh apron around her waist, and something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not just awareness, humility. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but radiates in the way a person walks softer on old floors, or lingers a second longer when handing someone a cup of coffee. She carried a white bakery box in both hands, its corners still warm from the oven. On top was a folded linen napkin, freshly pressed. The morning rush had barely begun. Only 2 tables were occupied, a couple at the window and Matteo at the corner, prepping silverware into rolled bundles. Dina nodded to him. "Has he come in yet?" Matteo shook his head, then motioned toward the back wall. There, above the booth where Hal always sat, was something new. A frame, simple, walnut-colored, centered perfectly over the window ledge. Inside it, a black and white photo. A young soldier in uniform beside a tank, snow dusting his helmet. Hal's name was printed beneath, in elegant serif font. Harold Brenner. Quiet valor, always welcome. Dina stared at it for a long moment. The man in the photo looked younger, leaner, but the eyes were the same. Clear, watchful, deep. She placed the bakery box on his table and unfolded the napkin beside it. Inside was a note, handwritten on cream stationery, her handwriting neater than she remembered it being in years. "For the man who never asked for anything, please let me bring you breakfast today. I've never served anyone like you, and I never will again without remembering this week. Dina." Then she stepped back and waited. Not hovering, not performing, just present. At 8:14 a.m., the bell rang again. Hal entered as he always did, coat buttoned, cane steady, shoes polished to a quiet gleam. But when he looked toward the booth, he paused. His eyes rested on the frame, on the box, on Dina, who stood silently, her hands folded before her like someone paying respects at a gravesite. She didn't speak first. Hal moved to the booth slowly, took his seat, and opened the lid of the bakery box. Inside, a stack of golden pancakes, still steaming, with fresh-cut strawberries fanned neatly on top. A single white flower, a wild daisy, rested gently beside the butter packet. Hal looked up. Dina's voice trembled just slightly when it came. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope I can serve you right today." Hal nodded once. A quiet thing, but deep. He lifted his coffee, took a sip. "Better than usual," he said softly. Dina smiled, just barely, but real. That afternoon, she walked 2 blocks to the Veterans Hall and asked to speak to the coordinator. By the next week, she was volunteering Tuesdays. She didn't talk much, just listened, refilled cups, folded flags for care packages, helped catalog letters from soldiers overseas. She began to understand silence, what it hides, what it protects, what it sometimes asks of others. On the following Thursday, when Hal returned, she had already placed his coffee down, warm, full, with a fresh spoon beside it. No eye roll, no sarcasm, just quiet service. She didn't look for a tip, but she left him something instead. A new card, neatly laminated, tucked under the sugar jar at his table. Table 3, reserved, every Thursday in honor of Hal Brenner, veteran, brother, protector of peace. Quiet heroes deserve loud respect. And this time, when Hal rose to leave, every patron in the diner rose with him again. Not because of what he'd said, but because of what they now understood. Respect isn't given by age or uniform. It's earned, but it can also be reclaimed. And sometimes the loudest honor is the silence we choose to fill with gratitude. Today we remember, always forward. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of a kind of strength the world often forgets, like this video to help honor those who walk quietly but carry everything. Let us know where you're watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. Subscribe for more true stories of quiet courage, dignity, and sacrifice, because sometimes the most powerful tribute is to pause and remember. Click on the next story now and join us for another chapter of valor, silence, and strength.